Morning, everybody. I'm Sam Albrecht. This is the Technical Advisory Committee meeting for November 26th, 2025, the day before Thanksgiving. I hope everybody has plans for this coming weekend. It's a time to reconnect, and I hope everybody gets a chance to do that. So if we can get started, I am going to share the slide deck. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Give me just a second where I had it all set up where I could view, but we'll work on that in a minute. So here's the agenda for the day. We are going to go over the ground rules for the public. I don't see a lot of public members, but there are a few names that popped in, so we want to make sure everybody knows what's going on. We'll go over our resources real quick. We'll talk about we've got a review of 002 kind of by major category that we're going to talk about today, and also a couple of code updates to discuss. And then we're going to look at the regional design criteria minimums, and then we're going to look at some outlines on third-party agencies and contractors, and then Shumes Coda Associates is going to give us a little bit of an update. Ground rules for the public. Again, we appreciate your participation in this important statutory process. We do make all our meetings public. They are recorded, and if you want to catch up on anything, we recommend looking at some of those past videos or reach out to either myself or any of the team here, and we will make sure that we get you caught up to date. If you have any questions during the meeting, of course, just type those into the chat or virtually raise your hand if you'd like to speak. I've got several co-hosts that will be watching the meeting chat and watching the meeting to see if anybody has their hands raised. And of course, we have to give priority to TAC members because those are the ones that are doing the work here, and we've got a very heavy agenda and tight timelines to get through. Also, any written comments can be sent to me, as I mentioned previously, at my email address, which is on this slide, sam.albrecht@state.co.us. The resources here are Senate Bill 25-002 itself. That's the whole reason that we are meeting right now. If you want to see our guiding statute, it is Colorado Revised Statute 2432-3301 to 3329. And there is a hot link in this slide deck, which will be posted and has been posted with every advisory committee meeting. Just go visit the website, which is at the bottom of the page, the Technical Advisory Committee website, and you'll have the slide decks and the hot links to all these resources. And then, of course, the administrative rules that we're actually talking about modifying in order to implement 002 and the Building Codes and Standards website are all excellent resources for anybody that may be new to this process. Want to just give a quick update on Rulemaking 1. And Rulemaking 1 is complete. Is going to be effective January 1st, and we are going to have an implementation public meeting for all interested parties on December 18th from 9 to 10, and we'll go over the major changes for anybody that is interested in the two major updates here, and that is the addition of business entity installers and other updates for installers, and of course the single exits in certain multifamily structures. And so those will be the topic of this Rulemaking 1 implementation meeting, and we will also get details out in our newsletter, and we will certainly record this meeting and make sure that the link is available for anybody that is unavailable to make that meeting on that date and time. We've talked about rulemaking 1.5 at this point in time, kind of announcing that we're going to just combine it with rulemaking 2. We are running a little bit behind schedule, and we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to discuss it. I will have, we're going to talk a little bit about some of that third-party agency work that we were talking about in rulemaking 2. We're going to continue to do the work. We have another TAC meeting next week on December 3rd, I believe. I will hopefully have red lines out to everybody on Monday, along with that slide deck, so we can start working through those in detail. And also, so we're not slowing down the work. We're just going to push it all into rulemaking 2. We had a very tight timeline for rulemaking 1.5, and rather than rush it, because it is such a big change for us and it is so important to 002, we're just going to move it to the end. So if anybody has any questions on that, let me know. Let me go through what some of the remaining work that we have done and some of the work that we have done as far as a 002 matrix type format, so that we kind of are all aware of what it is that we have ahead of us, right? So the responsibility and accountability piece of that, we are working on a matrix. You'll see some of that when I talk about general contractor education and registration a little bit later here. And we're going to look at suggestions on improving the on-site construction process. And then, of course, we have been and will continue to work with the Division of Fire Prevention and Control and the Department of Regulatory Agencies, and make sure that everybody's aware of who's responsible for what. General contractor registration and education, I just mentioned that. We are talking to some of the other local government agencies on what their general contractor licensing requirements are. Of course, we've been discussing it with TAC members, and then we are kind of researching 3 or 4 different opportunities to provide that training through a learning management system type of educational platform and content. We'll explore that a little bit more in this meeting. So get your if you have ideas on what you think that content should be for contractor education, please let us know. The third-party agency plan review and approval and audits by DOH, that's a big piece of this that we were hoping to do in 1.5 that we're going to slip a little bit. We will start diving deep into that, not only in an outline format for this meeting, but also for the 12-3 meeting. Audit processes for sellers and installers, that should be fairly simple. We'll get some draft language put together on that also. What we're thinking is 1 audit per every registered seller and every registered and certified installer once a year. The regional design criteria, many of you may have already received, for those of you that are participating jurisdictions, the survey form that is going out to start collecting that design criteria. We are also looking at other input from other organizations, including the manufacturers, on what those regional design breakpoints might be with respect to the cost of production. And we can talk about that a little bit also. What we also want to do is update this status matrix every meeting, so you kind of know where we are and what we have in front of us. So the next big agenda item for today is code updates, and what we are considering is a couple of things. We want to talk about the wildfire resiliency code for sure, and we want to talk about the safe use of ISO containers as factory built structure. So if you remember, we have adopted some guidelines on the last rulemaking that we did, not rulemaking 1, but the one before that, where we adopted the 2021 code set. We adopted the ICC's G6 guideline for panelization. We are starting to see more interest in the use of ISO containers as factory-built structures, both as residential and non-residential type units. And so what we're promoting, recommending is adopting the ICC G5 guideline for the safe use of ISO containers as a reference document, very similar for what we did with the G6. So this is the point where I'm going to stop and see if there's any questions or discussion on that option to recommend from the TAC to the State Housing Board to the adoption of G5 as a guideline. Any thoughts, concerns, questions? Tim, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My camera is not working.
That's okay, Tim.
I think it's on Thanksgiving holiday already.
Yeah, already, huh?
But with the ISO for the container, so that's just strictly for using or converting shipping containers into habitable space. Is that correct? I'm not that familiar with that standard.
Yeah, it covers a couple things about structural requirements and cleaning requirements. We can certainly provide a link to everybody on that and make sure that you have a chance to look at it, and we can revisit next week also. But it's a fairly basic standard. It just gives us some guidance on how to approve those things. Oh, good. Wayne threw it up into threw something up in the chat, so you may want to click on that, Tim, and go straight to it.
Yeah, it's not the actual guideline, but it does kind of give you, it just kind of gives you a Cliff Notes version of what its intended function is.
Good. Yeah, thank you. The reason I'm asking about that is we've had a few requests to use shipping containers and have them converted into habitable space. I don't remember having one on a residential side, but I have had a couple requests on the commercial side, and they've never been able to provide adequate structural details to show that, even though this, and so I'll take a look at this and see if that kind of satisfies some of that from a structural standpoint. I know these things are almost like performance based, where, you know, these shipping containers are sitting on the back of trucks and coming across. And I see Steve's hand, so I'm sure he'll be able to answer my questions too. Thank you.
Yeah, and Tim, it's a good point. You know, so we are starting to see, we have had these coming in both more on the non-residential side, the commercial side for commercial projects with closed construction, right? And we are starting to see some, we have seen a few come in as dwellings on the residential side, again, as closed construction. And we know that there is a greater interest. We are starting to get more manufacturers interested in this. We're also reaching out to Roxbox, which is another industry leader in this space, and see if they have any concerns on this G5. Mark, and then Steve.
Hey, Sam. Question: when we update the codes, or is there going to be any amendments to Chapter 31 that covers the intermodal containers?
Chapter 31, I'm making a note, Mark. So that's in the...
It's in the IBC.
Is the IBC, is there anything similar in the IRC, or does it just defer?
I don't think there's anything in the IRC, Sam. I think it refers back to the IBC.
Okay.
But there's a section in there for the usage of intermodal containers for structures. The G5 is basically for single, well, like we call them, standalone in a cornfield containers.
Okay.
Once you start getting multi or single, the G5 doesn't work, or where we start stacking them. So
Okay.
it's just something to consider in the chapter 31.
All right, great. We'll take a look at that. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks,
Steve?
All right, so, so I'm gonna continue on what Mark just said. So there is a new section 3115 in the in the 21 IBC. And it is basically a prescriptive structural design for intermodal shipping containers. There is no other requirements. Other than that, you comply with the rest of the code. In the IRC, there is a section, it's one sentence long. It says if you're doing an intermodal shipping container, then you have to use section 3115 in the building code. So there is continuity between the two codes, and that's new in the 21 and continued in the 24.
Okay, good. So it's in 21 already, and that's the code set we're on. So,
So
thank you.
good. Yep.
Does that help everybody else to understand the relationship? All right, so next meeting, we'll try to get to a final resting point on this discussion. That gives everybody some time to take a look at the IRC, IBC, and the G5 standard. Sam?
Yeah, to Steve, where is that one sentence in the IRC? I never found it, because we've been asked to.
Hold on, and I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat. How's that? So we don't have to.
Thank you very much. Just so, yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Mark, I'm sorry, you got your hand up again. Did I cut you off earlier?
No. I thought about this after what Steve said, is that basically when we're looking at this, where does the ESR for the containers fit into this? Does this help streamline as far as the plan review part of this?
It
Because
could,
I see,
Mark?
yeah, it could.
Oh, okay.
because basically they qualify the plants to have a quality control system that basically, once again, it doesn't certify anything. This is a building material. It is not a building until the engineer is finished with it and got it designed, and it's constructed. It's just a three-dimensional 2x4 at this point. Yeah, the ESR, and I think, Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Intertech is also doing a certification for it, or a qualification for it.
Yes, they are. Yeah, there's several people doing it. So you have that. Real quick, since I'm on, it's the section number in the IRC is R301.1.4. Andre got it already in the chat. So there you go.
Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
But that's all I got, Sam.
All right. Any other discussion on this one right now? Now, I know in that, in our research on the G5, there are other states that have certain restrictions on shipping containers. California was one. I think Texas was another one. We took a look at those too, but I'm not sure that we need to create anything unique for Colorado. If anybody has any unique shipping container requirements that we think we should adopt statewide for closed construction within these shipping containers, please let us know. And we'd be happy to consider those. Mark?
Georgia requires that the container be no older than 4 years old. I don't know if that, mainly because they can get information on those containers. If you go back to the 2006s, 2009s, all the way up to like the 15s, it's almost impossible to find the mill cert sheets for them.
Okay.
But just a little bit of input there.
We'll take a look at that. That's a good idea. All right. Let me jump back to the slide deck, and we're going to talk about wildfire resiliency code a little bit.
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, I just really quick, first of all, I didn't even know there was a container code. So I need to obviously familiarize myself with that. And I don't mind doing that. But what I do know from container, friends and having some experience with attaching a container to a trailer is, um, and yes, I'm glad that you guys are reaching out to Rockbox, because that's who I worked with when we did attach a container to a trailer. And so they are one of the leading experts. So I do hope that we are still paying attention to this because I know that there are things that you have to do with containers. And the first and the most important thing is making sure that you're starting with a clean one that doesn't have toxic chemicals and things of those natures. So obviously, I need to take my time to familiarize myself with that, but also ventilation. I know what we've gone through is for tiny house builds and from blower door testing and things of that nature that are required and some of the things that we've imposed even with tiny houses. And I'm assuming that all of these same rules apply when it comes to the containers, because I do know that good welding, proper window installation, proper heat control, and all the ventilation stuff is kind of a big deal when it comes to the containers. So I hope we are paying attention to that as well.
Tracy, that's a good point. So, one of the things that we did see in some of the other states, and it may tie to this also, is that um, is to make sure that that container is very clean. Most of those have a wood floor, and if it has transported hazardous material,
Correct.
or just power washing it out only creates more hazardous material, which needs to be handled, right?
Correct. So all of the shoulda, woulda, couldas that you can get some of those container builders to um, disclose and talk about will just help, us have the right requirements for people to be safe. And the same thing with attaching a tiny house to a trailer and and handling wind and snow and all those other things. It's just because that container is, solid from a structural perspective. There's still some things that we have to pay attention to. So I appreciate you for that. I just wanted to mention that. I will that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Good points. And Robbie, I see your message in the chat that there's a container built house in Northwest Denver. So we'll reach out to Denver and see if they have any see if they have any guidelines that we may want to also consider adoption. Mark, your hands up again.
I hate containers. I really do. But I have worked with them since I can't remember since I was with the state of Arizona. So Mo, you know how long ago that was. Uh, but on the back of the container is a what they call a CSC plate. Inside the G5, there's a way to decode it. And Tracy, to kind of help clarify that, it will tell you if that container has had hazardous material in it or not. So there is a way to decode that placard, and you would know right away, and either it's a yes or a no on that container.
Well, that's going to be critical for a lot of the DIYers out there that are taking that approach for their builds.
Well, especially since containers are going for pennies on the dollar right now.
So
Now,
one company I'd also talked to was looking at once used food grade only containers, right? So the again, if for those with experience on containers, if there is limitations we should do, and Mark, I know you hate them, but we just want to make sure they're safe and that we're checking everything we should check for the state of Colorado.
that's just a statement that I hear from everybody that does containers, Sam. I don't hate them. I know what they're about and stuff. Now, there are ones called one trippers. They are specifically designed, no hazardous material. Um, the flooring is still an issue because of the what they treat that with, and some of the treatments are considered hazardous in the U.S. But other than that, Tracy, there's ways to look at them on your own that you can decode what the container is.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the California's concerns is that some of the materials that that wood was preserved with. All right, good discussions. So we're back to the slide deck, and we're looking at the second bullet on this slide, and that is the Wildfire Resiliency Code map and Indian amended maps adopted by January 31st. So I'm going to jump back off of share so I can see everybody's face and see the hands. So if you remember right, the history that we've been having on Wildfire Resiliency Code, and structure hardening requirements for factory built structures. We started some very early discussions on that. Since then, we've been, and we always have been, very involved with that Wildfire Resiliency Code implementation plan. What we have found out is that local jurisdictions are starting to do a couple things with respect to the state adopted map. And we had Eric Freed on, and he's talking about us moving Larimer County to a statewide, to a county specific requirement for everything in the county to be class 1. I think it was class 1, the lower level on the wildfire hardening requirements. And so what the Wildfire Resiliency Code Board is doing is it is allowing local jurisdictions to amend or recommend amendments that cover their jurisdiction in addition to the statewide map that would supersede the statewide requirements. And it's based on a couple things. One, they can always go more restrictive if they want to. And two, if they think the map has any areas that are not correct, they can ground truth those and change those based on ground truthing, right? So what we are, because we need to finalize our requirements by the end of January so that everybody has time to look at them and we get them filed as amended rules in March. We're going to take what we have. We're going to take the state map and any pre-approved maps as of January 31st. We know that there may be additional maps that come after that, and we will work out what that process looks like. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and consider what we're going to recommend is adopting the state Wildfire Resiliency Code, and as it relates to structure hardening for the different classes. Does that make sense to everybody? Any concerns with that? Dean?
Yeah, I actually have some very recent experience working on a project in Golden. Will be a modular project.
Okay.
And the Golden, it's actually an unincorporated Jeffco, and we've spoken with some of the officials there about this very specific thing, because the site, when you look at the wildfire resiliency map, and I don't know if anybody at the call has actually done this and zoomed into a specific site, that site actually has all three criteria on the same site. And this is not an easy, user-friendly map, I can assure you. So I don't know, as a design professional, how we're even going to apply this, or if it's going to require a month-long records request from a jurisdiction to make a determination on what will actually apply as a design criteria before we can even start design. So I just, from that experience alone, I'm suddenly having deep concerns about using that state map for anything.
So if you remember some of the maps I showed early in these TAC meetings, there was one subdivision in Larimer County that had all three zones, no risk, low risk, and high risk in a single subdivision. And so that is the things that we're going to run up against. And I think we will, as we are required to be the most stringent in the regions that we pick, I think we're just going to have to sit down and work that, Dean, one-on-one with the local jurisdiction and the Wildfire Resiliency Code on a case-by-case basis. How are you approaching resolution on this, and are there any lessons learned
Well, so far, unfortunately, this is also new that nobody in the jurisdiction seems to appear to have the authority to just make a decision, tell us what it is, put it in writing, and let us move forward. And that's all we want,
Do
right?
not.
Like we're just like, look, we need you to tell us what it needs to be. Otherwise, we will literally be designing to the highest risk category in
Yeah.
almost everywhere because we see this. I mean, when you zoom in, it's literally just pixels, and they're like little tiny pixels kind of spread across all over the sites. So it does not organize itself by jurisdiction. It doesn't organize itself by parcel. It's literally just pixels throughout the map. So it's all we need is somebody to tell us what the requirements are so we can move forward, but we're kind of stuck right now.
Yeah, I think there will be other people that are stuck. The site, whether it was site built or factory built, I think either type of design process is going to be stuck, and I think they're going to have to overbuild to the most restrictive. Donnie?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from practice of enforcing special requirements like that, like wind loads and snow loads, as you know, places like Fair Play, you're on one side of the road and snow loads are one thing, and then on the opposite side of the road it's totally different. I think the code is really worried about where the structure is located, and so I think in practice we would possibly, I think this is just an idea, is just enforcing the requirement on the structure if the structure is within that zone. So not necessarily the lot line or the property, you know, if it's within certain provisions of the different hazard areas, you know, we wouldn't enforce that specific requirement unless the structure was in that area of the map. So that's one way to look at it. So let's just say that it was next to a high hazard or a low hazard, but you know, it's a certain distance away from that and it's not actually in that area. Maybe going with the location of the structure is not within that area, so there's no enforcement. There might be some site mitigation stuff that might have to happen. So I think there's a certain distance you have to be from, tree line and stuff like that. So maybe that would apply, and to say like, hey, the structure is not there in that area, but there is some vegetation and stuff that's within range that might need to be cleared up, just to say like, hey, everything was done to meet the intent of the code. There's no need to bring this to the highest compliance because it's not within that area of the map. Just certain portions of the property are. So I guess that's one way to look at it, but I guess that's just something that we need to think about since it's not clear in the WRC. I don't even think it's clear in the WUI code. I think it's just specific to the location of the structure. So this is one way to look at it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Tim, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dean, I totally agree. Well, at least the map in Broomfield, the state map, we could zero in into certain areas and see that the kind of the suggested pixel line, whatever you want to call it, will go right through the middle of some lots. We have an area, a subdivision that's in the high risk area right in the middle of our community, which we're in the process of trying to ground truth that map to get completed to take it back to the state. But so that's an issue of how that's going to be enforced, at least from a jurisdictional standpoint. But so my question, or my kind of leads me to my question, Sam and Donnie, is if you adopt the state map and then the project, the site specific one, would have to comply just like any other design loads with the most stringent of what's adopted, say in Broomfield, for example, or Jefferson County. You would have to, the manufacturer, I would say, I guess, have to go to that jurisdiction and find out what their map is, or you would be providing whatever list of maps there are, I think is what you were saying. And then the manufacturer would have to comply with that. And, whatever that map might be, is how I think that process. And then Donnie, you just mentioned about, site specific vegetation, stuff like that. I don't think that has anything to do with the state reviews and approvals for the plans, because the local jurisdiction would then take over the rest of that permit for when it's going in. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a correct assessment. It's the wildfire code is a permitting code, right? It pushes the responsibility of allowing building permits through the permitting official for the jurisdiction in question, right? And so we need to overbuilding will be simple because it will require the local jurisdiction should not say no. It is our intent to have not only as a resource the state map and jurisdictions who have adopted their own map and or probably their map as a resource for the manufacturers. Tim, how are you handling a building permit that splits a lot, where the map splits a lot?
We haven't adopted the code yet, so I don't have that answer.
What are you thinking, Tim?
Well, we're being recorded right now, so with that being said, I think that we would have to look at the best we could to see where the approximate line is located in reference to the building footprint. So, if half of
there's a couple options. You're either going to have to do a house that's class 1 on half the house and class 2 on the other half of the house, or you're going to have to go either lower or higher, right? Those are your three options.
I sat in and listened to, wasn't on that WUI code board, but we listened in because we're very interested in that. And that question came up as to how jurisdictions would need to be doing that. And I think there was not a good response from that group who helped produce that code. And they were going to, punt over to the jurisdiction. But if we could determine if that line was, where it's really hard to find where the line is, then you could definitely go down the path of half, would be no, and the other half would be a 1 or a 1 and a 2. So that's going to be why building officials will, keep getting their paycheck, I guess.
I have no doubt they'll keep paying you, Tim. So the other thing that we've talked about, that's the intent. We have to do something to make sure that we have a level playing field with the site built folks and on wildfire resiliency. So Sam, you got some good ideas for us?
Well, maybe. I know as a building official for too long of a time, you'd have to go high. You can't, you're protecting your jurisdiction. So you'd go to class 1 if you had a question about what it was. But one of the things we do use, and our lots are smaller and there's a lot of different things about Telluride, but we would use a certified surveyor if you're going to do a half and half. If you're splitting the baby in half, you better get somebody else other than yourself doing that. And surveyors, they may be able to take the state map to individual lots. I don't know. But that's how we would approach it, because you kind of you're out on a limb. You got to choose. You can't. And so will manufactured housing too. I doubt they would go lower. I mean, it would be silly.
Right.
Take it all the way to the site and have to take it back. So they, I mean, that doesn't make anybody money either. So.
Yep. The other thing, any other thoughts on that? I want to share another slide here that we worked on. The other thing that we've thought about doing is just going to a default class 1 structure hardening. It just requires metal gutters, class A roofing materials, and mesh covered fence. And that would be the base. If there was an exception that the manufacturer wanted to get from the local jurisdiction, where if it was not required, then that would be an option. Donnie, did you want to talk about this a little bit? And Tim, I saw your chat that the fun one will be when one side of the street is the high class 2 and across the street will be nothing. I think that's what Dean is running into right now, right? And that was something that I tried to call out in that map, where you have a single subdivision with no structure hardening requirements. Part of it was class 1 and part of it was class 2. How does that work for a manufacturer or a builder who's doing something on one side of the street but not the other, right? Donnie, I think I want you to go next, and then Sean will jump to you.
Yeah. So sorry, my brain thinks while everybody's talking. So when you guys were talking about how we can handle this, these are just ideas that I'm thinking on the fly. But I think that it would actually go along with this requirement. The assumption is that when builders are designing these structures, they're providing high quality products. They're not like things that you would buy I guess in mass, right? Or they wouldn't build in mass, like hundreds of these at the same time, and they're trying to build a quality product. And so most of the products that are coming to Colorado most likely have metal gutters already. Class A roofing materials, I was looking into the pricing from class A to class C, and there's probably like $1 or $2 difference per bundle when purchasing those shingles, at least from a consumer side. Public side of things, the prices might be a little bit different from a business side of things, just because you're buying more of them. But there's not really a big price difference between the two materials. The installation methods should be the same. I don't think there's any special requirements. Shingles are shingles for the most part. There might be some special shingles that are out there that need a different way of installing things, but your typical asphalt shingles should be installed the same way. So at least out of the two things here, these are probably already being provided or can be provided with minimal cost. But if we do, let's just say we do a class 1 minimum across the board to start off there, instead of doing the guesswork of whether or not it's in low hazard or no hazard. If you just do a class 1 across the board, there wouldn't be that much of a cost difference in my mind. I guess I would have to dig into that a little bit more, or hear back from the manufacturers if they would see a price increase and how much that price increase would be. But providing a mesh covers or the protection at the vent openings, you're talking a small amount of material for that. And then, but if you have an issue, let's just say, this is what I was thinking when you guys were talking, is that let's say we have a structure where it's kind of split down the middle, or let's say it's part of the structure is in there, like a little, 10 feet of that structure is within there. Maybe we can say like, hey, if more than 50% of that structure is within that boundary, then you must comply with that, the wildfire map. Or if we do a class 1 and it's right on the border, I'm wondering if the WRC would allow us to say like, oh, sorry, the baby's crying. If part of the structure or part of that lot is within that range, if we were doing a class 1 fire protection, if that meets the intent of the code of having protection, it's kind of like, it's not all the way in the boundary, but it's just on the border of the boundary. Providing a class 1, it has some protection at the roof and at the openings, if that's meeting the intent. And then anything that is 100% within that boundary would have to comply with that map itself, or whatever the locals adopt and amend with the WRC board. We comply with those requirements. Just something to think about. Again, I'm just kind of thinking on the fly here, trying to throw out some ideas just so that everybody can think about it. But yeah, I think if we do a minimum class 1, it makes things a lot easier. I don't think there would be a big cost increase, but I think some feedback from the manufacturers and maybe some of the other individuals on this TAC team that know the pricing of the materials. How much?
And Donnie, those are good points. Thank you for bringing that out. And it's Larimer that's going to go class 1, I think, across the entire county, right? They're going to go class 2. Okay. We were thinking class 1, and as we look at our regional design standard criteria, right, we would have a zone or a region where 1 is the base, 2 is if required, and then we would still have the option for a site-specific requirement if it made a significant, if there was an area where a unit or a multifamily or a big non-residential unit was going in where there was no wildfire requirements. Sean, you got some input?
Yeah, so on the mesh covering, I'm assuming you're going from a 1/4-inch grid to the 1/8-inch metal grid for the vent coverings.
Donnie says yes.
I believe it's an 1/8 inch for any ventilation openings.
Right. Okay. So then you get into, so like if you have for your drain line caps and any of your PVC vent lines that come through the roof, they do make kind of discs that you can glue or fasten in place. But then are there provision generally, is there going to be basically they'll limit some of the, because they have a pattern to them and they aren't straight grid venting, you may have to upsize some of those vent lines to accommodate for the actual vent percentage. Does that make sense? And then the biggest challenge we've seen when we've done these is obviously if we're doing pan vents, we pull those off. We have to put new mesh on those, and that's again a little bit of a job, but not a big job. But the soffit vents are where we always get into a challenge because a lot of the factories are using like a Hardie perforated soffit, and there's no simple, easy way to go in and do a grid pattern. Either on the outside looks terrible, and on the inside, I mean, you literally have to remove all that and redo that unless the manufacturer is going to be willing to do that. And most of them that I've talked to so far, they have no current intentions of changing that. They're just going to leave that up to the builder on site. So like I say, you have a lot of outside companies where you can buy vents that already have it. But again, if you're already doing a perforated vented soffit or even a vinyl soffit, how's that going to play into things as far as getting that mesh on it? You're almost just better off to go to a solid vent and then just use normal, whether they're 6 or 8 inch by, 10 or 11, 12 inch vents for your ventilation and your soffits. And then the other question comes into play: are any of the ridge vents? I think those openings are larger than a 1/4 or right at a 1/4 inch also. So how do you comply with those? Because if you get into doing ridge vents that are ember proofed, you can get into a lot of money there. So I just thought I'd throw those items out.
John, that's really, really good feedback, and I appreciate that. It sounds like it's a class 1 is a cost increase and design increase over, and maybe that should not be our starting point. Maybe we should have, no structure hardening, and then class 1 and class 2 for each set of designs. Is that a fair assumption from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say if we can get by without any fire hardening, that should always be the option. And then I just see that there's going to be some base increases across the board that can be material and somewhat labor intensive, depending on what the manufacturing is currently building. That's just what I see.
Okay. Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. One thing I think the board needs to consider is, say a subdivision that goes into a jurisdiction. So instead of a one-off build for the manufacturer, but a subdivision where the manufacturer is going to provide a series of masters. I've got a company, Oakwood Homes, everybody's familiar with them, and they're doing off-site builds now. And they are looking at a project in Broomfield. And so let's say, for example, you go back to the scenario where the WUI map line goes, kind of waggles through the subdivision, so parts of it are in 1, parts of it are in 2, and say most of it was like very low and nothing. So from a manufacturer standpoint, then to do, say, 5 or 6 master plans through the state to plop into that whole subdivision, the whole intent of this bill is to try to keep it regional and make it competitive to site-built construction. And I know that when that bill was passed, it wasn't thinking about the WUI code. I think it was more on the regional design standpoint, but now we have the WUI code. So considering doing everything in that subdivision, say for even a 1, because there are WUI rated ridge vents. I just pulled it up, and they're more expensive, of course, but they pass those rules. And, same thing with the regular roof vents and soffit vents. It was great that you pointed out the Hardy board with just the drilled holes. Those won't pass. So you're going to have a lot of costs just to site specific. So I think keeping in mind, doing something blanket like what Larimer County is talking about doing maybe, or already done, I don't think that's going to make it competitive, keep it competitive for the manufacturers, if I'm not mistaken. Thanks.
Tim, good points. Thank you. Donnie?
Yeah, I guess I just kind of want to throw out there too is that that was one of my concerns is the roof doing a ridge vent. Ridge vent is going across the entire roof system, but that's just one design method. You can do other types of roof vents. I don't know what the cost difference between the two are. I think it's more aesthetic than the actual getting good use out of the ventilation system. If you went like a turtleback vent on your roof, I think they're just trying to get the idea is to design it so that it doesn't look like it has a bunch of stuff on the roof. But one thing I was thinking about is that if you look at the WUI map itself, and you look at the high hazard and the moderate hazard and the low hazard areas, it covers pretty much the entire state, right? And so these areas that you're designing these structures for to meet a zero hazard application of the WRC, how many locations in Colorado do you actually build for that go to those locations? Because there's the option, at least in the way the table was proposed, is that there is an option for a site specific. So if you're thinking about trying to build mass amount of units, if you designed it to meet a minimum standard of, let's say, class 1, you know that it should be able to go into a greater majority of those areas where it's not a high hazard or a moderate hazard, right? And then you're less likely going to be able to design a zero class or no hazard structure for the state of Colorado and place it in a jurisdiction, because most likely there's going to be an area in that jurisdiction that's a class 1 or class 2. So you can say, hey, we'll do the minimum class 1 design so that we can install it pretty much in all those pockets of Colorado at a minimum. And then if you do find a site specific location that is a zero hazard, then do a site specific design and say, hey, we'll do a zero hazard on this one just so we don't have to have that additional cost for that specific home. But I guess that's just one way to look at it from the design standpoint, is if we do a zero class at a minimum, how many locations can we actually install that zero class structure? Because if you look at the map, like I said, it covers the majority of Colorado of high hazard and medium hazard. And there's borders of class 1. And then all the pockets where there's no hazard, it's all farmland. There's not very many areas where there is a no hazard area that you can place a home, at least by the looks of it. But that's just looking at the map. So just one thing to consider too. So I would hope we don't just take it off the table, but let's think it about a little bit more from the design standpoint. And if the whole purpose of this requirement was to be able to build more than just one house for a specific location, but being able to build a structure that can go into multiple locations, right? So just something to think about.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Donnie said. We has gone back and forth with trying to balance the minimal, what we think is the intent of the bill, which is the cost of manufacturing and making it as smooth for the manufacturers as possible while keeping it on a level playing field with the site built stuff. And so that's a cost evaluation. It kind of goes to Dean's points, one from the last meeting, and it's why do we want to do this and what's the North Star? And then more specifically, is there a cost in a subdivision where you have 3 different areas? Are you going to submit 3 different sets of building plans for a model home or a model townhouse or in that unit? Or if you were able to get by with 2, what is the cost savings there? So lots of hands jumping up. Wayne was first, and then Sean, then Mark. Wayne?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I just kind of want to bring up a point, and just right, the intent of this, as I understand it, in researching the modular construction community and attending the institute is right. We got to be careful, I think, with cost and trying and considering that, right? My understanding, and from what I've heard from folks from the industry, is that the cost implications of modular construction are on par, if not more so, than ground up construction. And I know that there's kind of maybe a little bit of an identity crisis within the community, but I think that's important relative to the decisions that we make, because ultimately where the cost savings comes in is not necessarily from the building materials themselves, but from the time that it takes to get to market, right? Getting that unit permitted, getting it constructed, and ultimately getting a tenant within it, right? So I think we just need to caution ourselves a little bit on, cost implications, because as Donnie kind of alluded to, right, I think the intent of this bill is to streamline to the extent feasible, but not inherently make something less safe when comparing it to ground up construction. And I don't believe the intent is to make it harder on modular construction, but that said, I don't know that it's really the goal to make it easier when we're comparing the two. So I just want to make that note, and ultimately to kind of circle back to another topic of, how this WRC map relates to sites and buildings on sites. Ultimately we're looking at, to me, we have to design to the highest risk, because if that building or whatever is straddling multiple different categories, right, that we're worried from a fire perspective about the involvement of that structure, right? So that ultimately it only makes sense to go to the higher hazard, because if that hazard truly exists as part of that building location, then once the building's involved, that's what we're trying to mitigate. So with that, I think that's my soapbox. Thanks, Sam.
No, thanks, Wayne. And Mo echoed what I've been trying to say. The cost it really depends on the project and the location.
Mm-hmm.
And there's cost of materials and there's cost of design and production, right? So those are the 2 costs that drive modular construction. And so that's what we're trying to balance. Sean, and then Mark.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Wayne was saying. From doing this every day, most manufacturers don't but they really don't have, that we deal with, don't have a sense of what they need to do to meet these basically WUI or fire resiliency requirements, and they ship a lot of homes into other states that don't have those requirements. So, once we get this kind of figured out, what it's going to be, then it's going to be, we have, as retailers, we have to go back to the manufacturers and say, okay, this is what we need. Now, whether they're going to comply or not, that's where the big cost comes in, is because if that's not part of their standard bill of materials, they're going to keep building it and say, you guys just modify it on site in Colorado, because again, a lot of states don't have the same requirements. So that's where you get into the dollars and cents. And as far as manufacturers, I mean, the simplification and going to the class 1, I'm not necessarily against, if you can opt out of it and go to a 0, which you're going to see those areas, like Donnie said, there's some farmland, but there's also, your urban areas that are going to be somewhat excluded from that. At least here in Mesa County, when I look at the map, a lot of the city is not encompassed in that. So we would hate to see, because you're talking on a per unit basis, assuming you have to do a fair amount of labor on site, you're talking $3,000 to $5,000 per house to make a class 1 work. Now the scales may change on that as we get better and a better understanding of what all we need to do, because in general, when I've had to do this type of compliance, like in Ouray County and different areas, in the past, they've really not had a great guideline on what we need to do. So maybe we're overdoing things. I'm not sure. But so I just wanted to throw that out there, that manufacturers are going to build each house on a case by case basis. They're not going to build 10 homes and stockpile them and wait for people to come and buy them. So it is better. Getting into the regional thing is way better than the site specific. I agree. I don't mind the class 1 necessarily as a rule, as long as in 0 areas we have the ability to opt out.
John, thanks. What I wrote down on this, and all your comments were good, and we appreciate the estimate, but was the fact that a lot of the manufacturers we deal with are not dealing just with Colorado, and they're shipping product to many other states, and they're using pretty much the same set of construction drawings as a starting point from unit to unit, right? So that is important information. Thank you. I want to go to Mark.
Thanks, Sam. I'm going to digress just a second back to the separation areas. The WUI maps some areas are required, but most are recommended. Just to give you a reference, in California, they have a subsection within the code 7A, which is underneath the fire departments, where they would take into consideration their service area, if they can get to the area at all. So that's one of the things that they do. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about is the area F3 that could be next to a class 1, and the blowing embers would then classify that area as an F3, which is a pretty high hazard. But it is not classified underneath the class 1s. So, I mean, there's so many elements that go into this when we're classifying areas, that we have to look at the general consensus of what is the area, the density, the types of building, the location, like Donnie said. If it's next to an irrigated farmland, very doubtful that those crops are going to catch on fire. But after the fires we've seen here in Oregon, it was devastating at what happens when that does get out of hand. I mean, I can't imagine what California looked like, but I visited the area here in Oregon, and it was devastating. So I just wanted to get that out there, that basically the outlying areas are recommended. There are certain required areas. Yes, they're done by the U.S. Forest Service.
Yep.
But the outlying areas are recommended, and there are other classifications like the F3 that have to be taken into consideration for the character of what the fire does.
Yeah, and so I think the other thing that weighs into some of this, Mark, is that we have seen major fires in other states, and we've dealt with major fires in our state. One up in Tim's country, Colorado Springs is another one where it has helped push some of this concern forward, right? And so we certainly want to be respectful of what other jurisdictions have gone through with respect to wildfire. Wayne, do you still have your hand up?
No,
Okay,
I'm just
thank
ready
you.
for Thanksgiving. Sorry.
That's okay. And so, Mark, the other thing you brought up was fire separation distance, and I think we wanted to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to jump back to the slide deck real quick, talk real quickly about fire suppression. It's going to be, if locals require it, DOH is going to require it for factory built structures, right? And that's the easiest way to solve that one. We've never had any thought of requiring fire suppression in every unit for the state of Colorado. Here's where we're talking a little bit about accessory dwelling unit separation. We were thinking that our base would be 1 hour fire separation between units within 5 feet of another structure or lot line, which I think is the IRC requirement, and that would be exempt if waived by the locals. Everybody good with that? Tim?
Yeah, I think, well, you only need you go down to 3 foot with the fire sprinkler. So I'm not sure if you want to clarify that if we put in, at least with the lot line.
I'm not sure I understood, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the fire separation distance requirement drops
Yep.
from 5 feet to 3 feet when you have an IRC
Oh,
fire sprinkler.
So maybe we can just reference that 302 table for the fire separation.
That would be better, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Not sure who was next. I was making some notes. Mark, do you want to go next?
No, that's fine. This is more for Tim and some of the locals that are there. In section or chapter 5, I can do multiple buildings on a lot and consider them as one as long as they're underneath the allowable square footage. How do you guys feel about that part of it?
Just sorry to jump in. So that I thought about that, but the problem is we don't know what jurisdictions are going to allow that and what jurisdictions are not going to allow that.
Exactly.
So to keep this consistent and to take out as many variations as possible. That's why I said, to propose this, because it says it already says like, hey, this is the minimum requirement. If the locals require anything, they're either going to require the same thing or they're require less, right? So just requiring this across the board for all structures, and then allowing them to get out of it if there's a local exemption would be, I think, the best way to handle that. Just so we're not saying like, well, we're not going to enforce it. We'll enforce it if the locals enforce it. It's just going to make things a lot more complicated. So we just set the minimum, follow the building code as it is, at least for the fire separation of residential structures. And then if the locals say, hey, we actually don't enforce that here, then they can be exempt from that requirement. I honestly don't even know if it's like 50% of the state would require it or, 20% of the state would require it. It's hard to say, and I'm not sure if we'd get that information. At least for 100% of the state, we wouldn't be able to get that information.
Right, and most of this is going to be for commercial anyway, Sam, because you don't consider residentials, tract homes as one building, but in the commercial side of it, temporary classrooms is a prime example where I have 4 or 5 classrooms going out to a site, and I don't have the area that I need for the separation.
Okay.
But this is just just a thought. I was just wondering what even Dean and Steve, what's your guys' thoughts?
Dean, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was thinking about something different on this particular slide. I'll start with that, and then maybe it'll trigger some additional dialogue. But historically, when we have two buildings adjacent to each other, we have to use that, sort of the code description of the imaginary lot line approach, where, if I have two buildings and they're, within 5 feet of each other, I have to either, assume the lot line is adjacent to one building, and then I've got 5-foot building separation to the next building, and then I would define what that wall assembly would need to be for fire ratings, or the imaginary lot line might fall between, in which case I have 2.5 feet between the imaginary lot line and the wall assembly, in terms of determining maybe if they're identical wall assemblies, what those would be. So I'm trying to get my head wrapped around if we just state a 1 hour fire separation between units within 5 feet of another structure, how that applies to the way the code currently handles building separation.
Is that a question for us?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, are we talking about doing something different than the code is already doing in terms of building separation?
Yeah, so no, we're not planning on doing anything different than what the code requires. It's just we're trying to minimize the variations of if a local is going to enforce that requirement or if they're not going to enforce that requirement. And again, the at least in the my mindset, the way I'm trying to think of this as a whole is we're trying to figure out the best way to produce as many structures off of one plan set that meets a certain criteria, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're saying like, hey, I'm a ADU manufacturer, I want to produce 100 of these homes in 2026. How can I do that without having to submit different plan sets, right? So if I want to do that, I don't know if the local is going to require fire separation. I don't know if they're going to exempt me because they consider me two buildings on the same lot, right? Using the IBC. And some jurisdictions are like that, right? And so if I want to build 100 homes without having to submit different plans to you, if I just do a minimum, hey, this structure can be installed within 5 feet of another structure, or 3 feet with the fire suppression system, this is the design for that, right? Mm-hmm. If the locals don't require it, then maybe I can have another design set that says, hey, this is without separation for areas of Colorado that don't require fire separation between dwellings, right? But you still have to take into consideration the lot line. So that's just the way I'm thinking of this. And I'm trying not to get too specific on the site, but trying to think generally like, hey, if I want to build as many structures off of one plan, how can I do that, right? And so if we just say, hey, this is the minimum requirement, then we don't have to do that guesswork. And then if by chance they do exempt it, then you would be exempt from that specific structure on that specific lot, right? Mm-hmm. And you can design 2 different ways and submit 2 different plans. So if you do run into a situation, you already have a plan approved that doesn't have it, right? Or you can submit one plan like, hey, this is what it looks like without fire separation, and this is what it looks like with fire separation. So if you do find a situation where you're designing 100 of these, and out of that 100, 10 of them do not require fire separation, you already have a plan approved that shows what it would look like without fire separation. You just know that that structure can't go into other jurisdictions that require fire separation. Does that make sense?
Sure. And for purposes of clarity, then, are we talking about the measured dimension between the exterior wall assemblies or the outermost point of any portion of that building, like a roof overhang or an edge of a deck?
Well, it'd be what's required in the IRC. So your overhangs, your exterior walls, anything that's applicable per Chapter 3 for that specific section of the fire separation distance.
Okay, because that always raises questions when buildings are not, perfect cubes. And so, well, 1 hour fire separation just at the eave then, or do we actually have to do a 1 hour fire rated assembly, even though if the exterior walls are, say, 8 feet from each other, but because there's a 2-foot overhang on each one, now we have a 5-foot distance between the fascia to the fascia. Would we fire rate just the eaves, or would we actually have to fire rate the entire wall assemblies, even though they're 8 feet separate, but the whole
Yeah,
building
so that
themselves is 5, right?
yeah, and that sounds a lot more like a site specific home or ADU, right? And so again, zone 5 would be that catch-all. Like, hey, I'm not building a 4 sided wall ADU. I'm gonna build this custom ADU that has multiple, corners. That would be a site specific one, right? If you want to build them in mass, then and you don't know where it's going and what lot it's going on and how it's going to be positioned, this is the route you would go and say like, hey, I want to build these in mass. You submit one with fire separation to account for any position, right? Or you just wait for that one customer to come to you and say, hey, I would like to have this structure on my lot. These are the only walls that are within 5 feet or within 3 feet of the property line or another structure. And then you would submit a plan specific to that home, which would be in that zone 5 category, site specific, right? And then you would just submit one specific model for that one lot, right? But again, thinking back to building these in mass, if I want to be able to build multiple of that same unit, and I would have to make sure that I account for that fire separation, you would just submit a design that accounts for that on all walls. That would be, if you don't know what the position is going to be, or what the orientation is going to be, if it's going to be 5 foot on one side and 10 feet on the other, this is just one way of doing that, right? But I think for those custom models where I want to, do a 20 sided building, then yeah, I think that's going to be a site specific variation.
Gotcha.
Okay, thanks, Donnie. Thanks, Dean. Steve?
So the multiple buildings being considered one is only in the IBC. We don't have that language in the IRC, and it's not a local jurisdiction decision. The IRC really doesn't, like I said, doesn't have that language. We used to have some language, but the 21 was changed to take some confusing language out that actually Tom Myers put in the code many years ago. But and so it's all based on fire separation distances, and fire separation distance is measured to the face of the exterior wall. The eaves, the decks, all those kind of things are considered projections and covered in those tables as well. But we're going to measure all that based on the location of the exterior wall surface to the lot line or an imaginary line between the two buildings. So I think what Donnie was also saying is that if the jurisdiction wanted to accept an alternate design to say, okay, multiple buildings on one lot are considered one, they could. I'm not sure I would recommend that because, they're not like an office building where you've got multiple office buildings or apartment buildings are all built the same type of construction and those kind of things. So don't know that that's really the intent of the code in the IRC.
Yeah, just to jump in real quick, sorry. So that's my understanding too, is that's not the intent of what the IRC wanted. But working with the local jurisdiction that somebody converted their basement into an ADU, they wrote into the provisions that there would not be any fire separation between the two spaces, because at any point that homeowner can convert that basement back into just regular living space and be part of the single family dwelling above. So basically although they're two living spaces and two dwellings, they can make it to where it's just one dwelling. It just has 2 kitchens, 2 bathroom areas, two areas for bedrooms. So that's why they wrote it into the provisions that way. So that's where it gets a little bit complicated, because again, I don't think that's what the intent of the code was, but that's how they are writing it into their ordinances. So we don't know if they're going to allow somebody to put an ADU and attach it to an existing dwelling and say, hey, at any point you can convert that into a single family. It's just going to have 2 separate bathrooms, 2 separate kitchens, but there's interconnection between the 2 buildings, right? and then consider that one building and not require fire separation. So it gets really complicated, and the zoning is what makes things complicated, and what ordinances that the locals adopt. And with it being a home rule state, the variabilities can increase over time. So,
Donnie, thanks. We're gonna let Steve respond, and then I'm going to have to jump into some more slides, guys. Steve?
So what I was talking about is two separate buildings, not when you do the ADU as part of the unit. There is a new appendix chapter in the 24 IRC that does address ADUs within the building or attached to the building, not a separate building, that you may want to look at just to see if you want to include that in any of your amendments.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a look at that. All right, thermal zone. I want to start rocking through some of these slides. We will revisit what we need to do on the meeting on 12/3. We were looking at thermal zone, climate zone 7 as the base. We know 5 through 7 have the same requirements. Now, there are 4 counties down, I think, in the southeast corner of the state where they are in climate zone 4. Some of those may see a trade-off opportunity in other parts of the construction of the unit if they go to a 7. Any thoughts or discussion on that? Okay, that's what we'll push forward then. Feel free to change your mind if you've thought on it later. Radon, what we pretty much want to do with radon is that there is design criteria internally or designed for an exterior pathway if there is a local radon requirement. Donnie, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
yeah, so if we just go with that, we need to prep the building. There's really 2 pathways you can go. You can, run a pipe through the structure itself, and then so it's set up to have radon mitigation at the site if the locals did require it. Or another way you can just do is, at least in my head, I'm saying you just make a note on the plans that a radon mitigation, if required on site to be installed, can be run through the rim board, right, and up the exterior wall, which would not require any kind of piping through the building. So there's different ways you can do that, and there's I'm trying to think of the 2 different ways to comply. There's a passive system and I can't remember the next one if somebody can help me out, but there's 2 different types of systems that you can use for radon. But some manufacturers already do this. They run a pipe through the building itself, and then if the locals require it, it's already set up to have it. And then just make sure that if it's not required at the site location, that you don't have a vent that goes from a basement or crawl space into the attic or something like that. Because if you're conditioning that crawl space, guess what? There's an opening there for you to pump air into your attic, and it's escaping through there. Maybe you can convert that in some crawl space ventilation or something like that, but just think about that in your design. But I think just making it say like, hey, instead of guessing whether or not the locals are going to require it, just prep the building, or just make a note that the design will be done on site, can be run through the rim board and up the exterior wall. Yeah, active and passive system. Thank you, Mark. So let's just require it across the board. Let's just account for it. There's different ways you can comply with that. I think it's just the simplest way to handle that.
Okay. Dean?
Just want to mention that for a single family house, that's straightforward enough, but this would also apply to commercial buildings as well, right? So we're talking about fire rated chases through multifamily apartments, hotels, things of that nature.
I have to look at that, but to my understanding, the only radon, at least in the 2018, was through the residential code appendix K. I don't think there was any kind of radon mitigation for commercial.
Right, not currently but that's what I'm asking. Like, would this then be a state code that that supersedes that and requires if it's factory built, then it's got to have a radon pad.
No, let's make sure we're specific to residential structures, because I think that's the only requirement is for it's Appendix K of the IRC. I don't think it's anything specific to commercial.
Copy that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as that's clarified.
Okay, thanks, Dean, for bringing that up. Tim?
Thanks. So you would suggest just pulling the particular couple of paragraphs out of the appendix and moving them in for the design stand or requirements for just inside of the building? So there's specific guidance. Is that what you're proposing?
I wouldn't say pulling language from the appendix, just because we don't know what locals adopted it, because it's only enforced, or I guess should be enforced by locals who have adopted that appendix. We just don't know what those locals are. Yeah, so Steve Thomas said that's not regulated in IBC. So, but we would just put in our design criteria that radon needs to be accounted for. At least for the structure, I don't think pulling language from the appendix would benefit. Maybe you can help me kind of get to where you're going with it, but I think just account for it, and then either run it through the building per whatever the protective requirements are going to be through the wall assemblies and floor assemblies, and then whatever site mitigation that's needed. I'm assuming that would be done by the locals. You just need to prep the building for it. What's another thing that we do that's we just prep the building for that we currently do?
Like solar ready.
Solar, yeah, solar ready. We're not doing all the site work stuff on it. We're just prepping the building so that if it was being done on site, that there's a path for them to comply through the structure or through the rim board of the structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to just pull up that appendix, and if I get any questions, I'll come back. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Sean?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would think you'd want to, if it goes through the rim board of the house or the rim joist, you're not going to want to cut that until after the house is set, because it creates a weak spot until it's on the foundation. So I guess my comment would be there should be an allowance if you're going to take it through the rim joist to just on-site by builder or however you want to do that. Because it gets really sticky especially when you go to a powered system. We generally put all those on the exterior of the home because just the power requirements and the distance requirements that are required for the fan. You have to have 36 inches of clear open space, and you can't put it in the crawl space. You can't put it in the living unit. So now passive systems, again, you can do the same thing. You can go through the rim joist. You can go straight up through the house. I just think having the ability to either put it in on site or it needs to be specified in the plans. But I just don't see the factories doing any prep going through the rim joist.
Yeah, and so that's my thought as well. That's why I said making a note. But I would assume that a couple details would be needed, depending on where they're going to penetrate, or maybe specific language details saying like if you penetrate the rim board or if you penetrate the floor and go out an exterior wall, that there's some kind of detail or description of how to do that. Just because they are having to account for their structure. They don't want somebody on site tampering with their unit and then messing it up and then it not being compliant anymore, right? So that's why I said, at least on the design side of things, regardless if it goes through the building itself or out rim board or something like that, that there's some kind of design method of how to do that so that they're not messing with any kind of warranty issues on the building or bringing the building out of compliance with the way that they penetrate the structure itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I get it from a warranty standpoint and that kind of stuff. Again, it's just it's going to be a little bit based on the design. If you get in doing as an example, a frame on IRC, you're going to have a reduced floor joist that probably doesn't allow for a 4-inch pipe to go through it. And so, yeah, some specifics there in a drawing, if it's going to be done on site, makes sense. I don't know about being overly specific about the exact location, because again, that can be site specific. But if it's an internal one, obviously, yeah, then they can put that in. If it's not used, it's easy enough to insulate and cap in the crawl space or something like that, so you don't lose any heat. So I get that.
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, it kind of just be like providing a detail like you would like your fire rated assembly penetration details are, right? Like, hey, these are just general details of how to penetrate my manufactured unit if you're going through these locations. And that'd be a simple way to handle that if you're not going to just run it up the wall. Okay.
Thanks, Donnie. Tim, last words on this one?
Yeah, thanks. So Donnie, I just recommend looking at the appendix 103.6.1, that's vent pipe, because it does give you specifics needing a 3-inch ABS, PVC, gas type pipe, and going up through floors, terminate through the roof. So, that may make sense to put that in as one of the options if you're going to pre-do this in the building, or, allow it to go out the rim. So you might want to just take a look at that. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Putting a minimum sizing for the materials and the material type. I guess that's a lot.
Thanks for everybody's input on that. We want to jump to third-party agency. We're going to look at creating a new chapter for that. Looking at the time, I want to talk, the things we've got left on the agenda for the day are third-party agencies, general contractor, education and registration, and then we want the update from Machine Dakota. Not necessarily in that order. We can bounce these things around if we need to. So I'm hoping everybody has thought or had a chance to look at the draft slides that we sent out. The way that we're addressing the third-party agency request is a new chapter in the administrative rules, right? And so we're going to talk about the 3 different areas where third-party agencies can work. Of course, that's the in-plan inspections, the plan reviews and approvals, and then the installation inspections as necessary. We'll talk about what a certified TPA will look like. We'll talk about the renewal process, the annual cycle on that. And then we'll talk about the performance standards and DOH monitoring and audits in there also. We'll address the conflict of interest, which we've had some really good discussion on in the past, independence and audit reporting obligations. And then we'll also take a look at transitions and changes and notification when key personnel have moved from one organization to another or have left the third-party agency. And then we'll look at enforcement actions as part of that. Does that make sense to everybody? Like I said, come Monday, when you get the 12.3 slide deck, I'll have these fleshed out so that we can go through them independently by section and kind of go over the discussion points, and then everybody will have a chance to review that. All right, with that said, we're looking at also another chapter for contractor education and registration. This is a part of the statute that we are hoping to get knocked out fairly quickly. I've got it until we look at the overall organization of the administrative rules. I'm calling it the GC chapter. Defines which general contractors this chapter applies to, which is those working on factory built structures, those not already licensed in the jurisdiction where the structure is going. And it will, also, our intent is if we do a registration for a GC, that it will, cover the entire state, for them to do, for any factory built structures that, while they're registered. If the, we're looking at flexible options, for pathways to registration. We're looking at, education and training requirements, insurance and bond requirements, and renewal criteria and frequency also in that chapter. Performance compliance standards. There are, two areas called out in statute. One is on-site prep, and utility connections and completion of the factory built structure itself. And then we certainly want to make sure we talk about responsible parties, and our responsibility matrix will come into that. Compliance with installation instructions and approved plans. And we'll talk a little bit about, accountability and guarantee and warranty and repairs for on-site work. And then the inspection and quality control. Most of the on-site prep, work, will be the responsibility of the local jurisdiction. And then we'll talk about the responsibility for finishing the on-site work, the OC work, as we call it, for wrapping up the unit and making sure it's compliant. We think that's still going to be the responsibility of the manufacturer before an insignia is placed on that. And of course, I know the devil's in the details of some of this, so we're going to continue to start drafting what the actual rules for this chapter would be. And then we'll talk about the enforcement section also. So with that said, we are looking at multiple platforms to maybe either do some type of learning management system so that a GC or building contractor gets a certificate. We want to hear from everybody on the TAC on what you think that education should look like. Please send Heather and Donnie and I an email, or any one of us an email, and we'll share it. There's again the two pieces. What does a general building contractor need in order to understand on-site prep work for single family home, for all the way up to commercial IBC type units, apartments, hotels, motels, and any other type of non-residential structures that may be going in that are factory built. So that's the piece of it. The other piece of the education, and we're going to do it as one education, right? I'm not talking about splitting up separate education. Will also be the on-site completion work. And so manufacturers, what you think the GCs that you have used. I don't know if you guys have internal training for your OC contractors that are finishing up your work. Or if you send a crew from the factory to do that work, well, what type of education they need for that. And then, even from details is, how long of an education should this be? Is it 2 hours on-site and 2 hours on OC work? Or is that too tight? And do we need to split it into two different modules? But the floor is really open as we start lining this up. With that, I want to pause and see if anybody has any input on either the third-party agency stuff that we've talked about. Again, knowing you're going to get more material next week, or the GC stuff as we've laid it out here for per statute. All right. Email us what you think should be in that education. Heather's taking lead on this segment, so we will report back next week on if we have any updates on this segment. Dean?
Just super quick question. Are there any GCs in this group or on the call that probably would be more central to this topic?
So
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody here is a GC, but I know that Adam Berger has Adam Berger Construction, and we've talked with Chris, I think it was there. And I know the manufacturers are, subcontract some of this OC work out on their own. That's the type of folks that we're going to be reaching out to. Dean did, and you have a contractor, I think, that you work closely with also for site work and
We worked with several for sure, and with a lot of these particular items, I don't have a lot of visibility on what that means to their business or what their feedback would be. So certainly wouldn't hurt to get some outside thoughts on that if we don't have that lens internally.
Yeah.
So
Hey,
let me
Sam, is Allie helping us out with that as well? Contractor feedback. Allie,
Donnie.
is Allie helping us out with contractor feedback as well?
Allie is. She can certainly may have some contacts. Dean, so I'm going to expand my request for the content of the education to people we should be talking to that have done these type of projects, right? What have they learned? And that's what we talked with, I really think his name was Chris, with Adam's team on what they learned in managing, because there's the GC, and then there's all the subs that go with it. Somebody's got on-site supervision of those folks. If you have any folks that you think we should talk to, we would be happy to do that. Send those to us also. Sean?
Yeah, I'm a residential GC and a light commercial GC. So I've got a lot of probably questions that are probably simpler to comment on as far as the breakdown here. Most local jurisdictions, when you do your testing, it's just basically if they require it, is just an open book test. Yep. 100 questions, whatever it is.
Yep.
So it, one of the couple of the questions I have is how does this licensing or registration, how does that affect if you've already in an area? Again, I understand it's required for areas that don't have an operating GC, but have you any feedback as far as local jurisdictions if this registration would run in parallel to their GC requirements, or would we still have to get the state and then the local as well if we have to do their testing and licensing?
Yeah, and I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that, Sean. If you have local licensing, you do not need to go through the state. That's very clear in statute.
But so the local licensing though is hopscotched. So it's like I have a best card that gets me through Pitkin County, Eagle County, Garfield County has no requirements for it. And then you have other areas that like City of Grand Junction has GC requirements, but the county does not. And then other jurisdictions that have GC requirements will typically allow me to use one of these other methods just to verify that I do have a GC license. And so it's very fragmented, and just wondering if this would cover like, let's say the town of Newcastle that has a GC requirement, would this supersede their requirement, or would this just be something in addition to their local requirement?
This would not supersede it. They would supersede this requirement. So if a jurisdiction has a GC licensure, permit, whatever you want to call it, requirement, that applies. This would cover for all the other parts of the state where
That
those
don't.
jurisdictions do not. Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that would still be applied in those jurisdictions that have a license or certification, whatever you want to call it, is they would still need to be, we'd have to coordinate with those jurisdictions on education and training requirements.
Yes.
But if there was like any complaint about the general contractor and their involvement in the project, that would be all processed by that local government that licensed that individual to do that work. But if it was a jurisdiction that didn't have a license and our license covered them, then any complaint about their part of the project would be processed through us. Does that make sense, John?
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And so again, one of the questions I have is you've got registration and certification requirements for installers, but it also kind of looks like the GC is responsible for that portion as well. And will there be clear understanding of where the differences are, or is the GC going to just take over and say they're responsible and you're responsible?
No, the installer would still be, and this is where it gets interesting, right? We as we know, some installers go above and beyond what the statutory requires for an installation, right? And so this separate registration would cover that. So they go past, what the statute says installer is responsible for, then that individual will then be registered with us as a GC in those jurisdictions that don't require to be registered as GC, right?
Right.
If the installer does not go past that and they stick within what is authorized under statute under the installer registration, then that they stay there. If a general contractor wants to do anything that's under an installer registration, then they would have to get registered as an installer.
Installer, right? Okay.
Exactly. So the installer is this in essence protects the installer, which has been put in some precarious situations in the past because they've been asked to do more than some of them are comfortable to do. And so this will help protect that as well.
So then in areas where there's not a GC requirement, is the state going to do inspections more so if the locals aren't doing them, or had there been any discussion about that?
Yeah, we're still fleshing some of that out, Sean.
Okay. All right, understood.
Yep, more on 12.3. Donnie,
Okay.
Can I cut you off and give the time to Shums Coda?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll save it for later.
All right. So Andre, I think you're up.
Thank you very much, Sam. Can we go to the next slide for me, sir?
This one.
Yep. Let's see here. Okay.
Nope, this one.
There we go. That looks a little familiar. Had me worried for a second. I'll try and keep it short. I know I'm between everyone and Thanksgiving, but I'll try and give you the highlights of what's going on with us. So last time that we came before you, we talked a little bit about the differences between the regionalized code design criteria and then the code triggers, right? And parsing those out led to some of the spirited conversation I think we had today. And in order to source that data and make sure that you have a good evidence-based procedure associated with the findings of the TAC, we produced a survey. That survey was reviewed by DOH and SHUMS, and it requires a number of different jurisdictional information that's germane to this conversation, right? Who's doing your fire district enforcement? How are you handling WUI? What have you adopted? Do you plan on changing maps, for instance, to Sam's point earlier? Captures a number of these things. Now, I do have a note for this last item at the bottom here where it says the survey allows uploading of a document. We originally designed it that way, and then I got a call last night right before I got on a red eye to go to Asheville, Carolina to see family. Basically what was going on is for some folks with their security settings with their local jurisdiction, they're running into issues with Google and being able to upload. So I had to change the format of that question where we are getting a link to that document, and where a link is not possible, they have my personal email address where I will get the corresponding information from them. And we're planning on using this information to be able to refine our information gathering stage here and get you as many jurisdictions as possible to overlay against the maps that you guys have already discussed. Next slide, sir. So we plan on using just about every option that we have before us, right? So this has been sent out as of Monday. We're going to hit up all the major jurisdictions in Colorado directly with personal emails, phone calls, and we have admin staff backing us up through Shumsco to be able to help with this, along with all the major chapter organizations for the building officials, fire officials in the state of Colorado. We're also obviously open to other suggested outreach points. So if there's somebody from the TAC here that would like to capture a particular mail list, things like that, we would certainly be interested in having that conversation because we want to be transparent that this is information gathering that helps create individual jurisdictions to be represented as data points here, and that informs better choices. Hopefully, reinforces the strategy that's been adopted up to this point, and something that we can demonstrably show empowers those jurisdictions by being represented there, and makes it easier for them to have parity between their site-built construction practices and manufactured expectations. So we'll be monitoring this very closely with our admin team, with myself personally, to look for those non-responsive areas and solicit them personally to make sure that we get as much of a comprehensive map as possible. Next slide. So our intention here, once we get the finalized results, we're going to take those, we're going to search them for duplicates, we're going to search them for, non-answers in certain places, anything like that. And then we'll run a suite of descriptive statistics, mode, mean, average, range that you can have to then inform your specific decisions when it comes to regionalized design criteria. So that's the intention of how we're going to use this data and how it will be presented to you is both in the raw data and then codified as you'd expect from any other research project with the opportunity to see these items broken down and understand a little bit of what the trends are behind them. Next slide. So this is your timeline for expectations. The survey is currently out for response. It went out Monday. We're going to be following that up weekly as we see what data is coming back to us and getting back out to folks along with outreach through these other formats. We're going to put a deadline for response here of Christmas 2025, right? So at that point, that gives us a week to be able to basically plug gaps with our admin staff, go through for any additional items, any folks that maybe send duplicates that don't align. That's also been one of the concerns as well, and making sure that we're able to address those hopefully for the 7th. For your TAC meeting on the 7th is when I'd like to either have those results or be refining those results for you with a report out for it. Tim, I just saw you jump into the chat. You said that you did not have a copy sent to Broomfield yet. I'll confirm that with our admin team. We did our first launch Monday at around, I want to say like 2 o'clock, maybe it's 1 o'clock, about middle of the day there. So if you aren't seeing it by then, yep. Everything is also coming from my email address personally. Okay, thank you, Britta. I did talk to Nate, and I don't know if he was aware of it, but that might have been our previous conversations aligning with that sort of chapter discussion. But I will follow up with him as well. So thank you very much for letting us know. And like I said, everything is going out with my personal email address. So if you have a question, you'll be able to get a hold of me. And I'm actually getting some questions back already and some comments that I will categorize that information, make sure it gets to DOH in a timely fashion here. So that's all happened in the last 48 hours. And I think that's my last slide, if I'm not mistaken, right, Sam?
I think so.
Okay.
Yep. That's your last slide. Any questions for Shumsco? Andre, why don't you give us an update on 12.3 if you can on what kinds of general questions you're getting and any concerns you're hearing back that we can help be proactive on and addressing.
Yeah. We're getting questions about sort of the overlay on this in terms of scope for tiny homes. That's been one of the first ones that came up is how is this going to align there? That just came to me from a couple of folks in some of our southern communities where that'd probably be most impactful. Southern counties in kind of the SLV region, the San Luis Valley region.
Yep.
Yep. So I got that, checked that this morning. That's probably been the biggest one. And then just understanding why we're soliciting the data has
Sure.
been a typical one, which is obviously a totally fair question.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And thank your whole team.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you guys very much for the opportunity.
So just a reminder on rulemaking 2 schedule, June 30th is our hard implementation date, and nothing has changed as we laid through this from the previous slide deck or previous meeting. More of a reference document. December 3rd, we're going to continue the discussion on rulemaking 2. Kind of the agenda for that will, as we'll lay out more the specifically third-party agencies and contractor registration and education. We want to wrap that up, and the codes. Oh, good, Tim, you found it. That's great. Thank you. All right, we're over on the right side of the big list of meetings. It looked overbearing at times that we were going to have this many meetings, and now it looks like we are in the final stretch. I hope everybody is ready for this final push. We are going to be doing lots and lots of work still to get it all wrapped up, and I want to personally thank you each for your time here. If there's any thoughts you have after this meeting, and before you dive into Thanksgiving, please let us know, and we'll get those addressed. And again, thank you for your time today. Any final thoughts or questions on anything? Donnie?
All right, I had to get it off my desk here. The licensing requirement from and correct me if I'm wrong, but the license or the contractor's licenses requirements are specific to finishing the structure, not the entire project. So there might be,
Yes.
foundations, on-site utility work, detached structures or attached structures that are being done on site. That license doesn't cover that, only the structure and the completion of the structure. So if you go from, let's say you have a license with us to do that work, you go to a new jurisdiction and they require licensing there. I think what might help is if we make our contractor licensing requirements consistent with locals, there's a chance they might accept that to finish that work instead of having you to retest and take their licensing requirements. So maybe keep that in mind. I'm not sure if that's going to be true or not, but just thinking that I think a lot of locals try to work with contractors as well. And if we're consistent with locals, they might be able to accept ours for their permitting process as well.
The other key point there is, and I'll do a better job of laying this out for the next meeting, is that the contractor education is going to be required of all contractors doing on-site prep work and OC work for the completion of the unit. And the responsibility matrix will look a little different for each one. Thank you all, and have a great Thanksgiving. And we are ending right on time. I'm going to end the meeting, and everybody, again, have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks all.
Likewise. Take care, guys.